My name is Naomi Marie Canton. I'm 68 years old, a widow, and for 40 years I co-owned Canton Family Orchards with my husband, Nicholas. We built our farm from 20 neglected acres into one of Pennsylvania's most respected organic apple orchards. I was a wife, a mother, a baker of sourdough bread. My son once loved a braider of my daughter's hair before school. 3 weeks ago, after Nicholas died of pancreatic cancer, my children came home not to mourn, but to steal everything he built. They left me abandoned on a roadside with nothing but a suitcase. But they forgot, before I was their mother, I was Naomi Blackwood, a woman rooted in this land. They thought they'd left me broken. Instead, they set me free. My name is Naomi Marie Blackwood. I was born in 1957 in a white farmhouse at the edge of Millfield, Pennsylvania. On a spring morning so bright my mother said the daffodils opened early just to greet me. I grew up with dirt under my fingernails and windburn on my cheeks, running barefoot down orchard rows in summers that smelled of sun-warmed apples and mown grass. My father taught me how to graft an apple branch when I was 7. My mother taught me to bake bread so soft it pulled apart in clouds of steam. I never wanted more than this small life rooted deep in familiar soil. In 1981, at 24, I married Nicholas Canton, the tall, broad-shouldered son of a neighboring farmer. He had eyes the color of hickory bark, in winter calm and strong. Nicholas didn't speak much, but when he did, every word carried weight. He proposed in the orchard under a rainier tree just starting to blossom, with a ring he bought after selling 2 steers and his old dirt bike. He told me, I can't promise you the world, Naomi, but I can promise you this land and these hands. And that was enough. More than enough. We moved into the Canton farmhouse, a weathered white clapboard house with peeling green shutters and a wide front porch that sagged a little in the middle. Nicholas spent the first summer after our wedding reinforcing that porch, while I painted the kitchen cabinets sky blue. We slept with the windows open, listening to crickets, barn owls, and the soft sigh of orchard branches moving against the roof. I was so young then, and so certain life would always stay that simple. 2 years later, Brandon was born. He came into the world silent and blinking his little face, wrinkled with confusion, until Nicholas whispered his name. Then he wailed with a strength that made the nurse laugh and say, "This boy has lungs built for preaching or command." From the start, Brandon was restless eyes always darting for something further away. He learned to crawl before 6 months walk by 9, and by 12 months, he could climb onto the kitchen counter to reach the cookie jar I kept hidden behind the flour canister. Melissa arrived 5 years later, a winter baby born during a blizzard that closed every road into Millfield. Nicholas delivered her himself in our bedroom, while I gripped his arms so hard I left bruises shaped like petals. She was quiet, alert, and watched everything with wide, dark eyes that made me think of fawns in early spring. Nicholas bundled her against his chest as the snow fell outside, whispering, "You're safe, little one. Daddy's here." Those years were filled with milk breath and night feedings with scraped knees and lullabies sung while shelling peas on the porch. We planted new trees every spring, extending Canton orchards row by row, until what had once been a struggling 20-acre apple farm became 50 acres of thriving Rainier's Fuji's and Honeycrisps. We were never rich, but we had enough. Enough to replace the old Ford pickup with one that actually started on winter mornings. Enough to send Brandon to Boston University and Melissa to a holistic nutrition program in Colorado she never finished. I spent 4 decades on this land, rising before dawn, to bake bread, while Nicholas checked the irrigation lines. My hands learned every curve of dough, every creak of floorboard in our farmhouse. I braided Melissa's hair into tight plaits that brushed her shoulders as she skipped to the school bus. I baked Brandon's favorite sourdough on Sunday mornings, listening to him complain about small-town life and plan his escape over buttered toast. I never thought to question it. That's what mothers do give without expectation. If you had asked me 3 weeks ago who I was, I would have told you simply, I am Naomi Canton, wife to Nicholas, mother to Brandon and Melissa, keeper of sourdough starters, older than my children, caretaker of 50 acres of living, breathing orchard that my husband coaxed into abundance. I would have said I was lucky. I would have said I was loved. I would have said my children were good people, that everything we sacrificed for them was worth it. But that was before Nicholas's cancer took him. Before my children came home not to mourn their father, but to strip his legacy bare. Before they put me in a car under the pretense of showing me a retirement community and left me standing on the side of County Road 27 with nothing but a small suitcase and the scent of betrayal heavy in the spring air. That was before I realized the truth. I am still Naomi Marie Blackwood, daughter of orchard soil wife to a man whose hands built something beautiful, mother to children who chose greed over love. But more than that, I am a woman who knows what it means to lose everything and rise from the ruin. Because kindness is not weakness, love is not blindness, and sometimes the softest heart carries the sharpest blade when it's been broken one time too many. This is who I am, and this is where my story truly begins. Nicholas's illness began the way a summer storm does, quietly, deceptively gentle. It started with a dull ache in his back that he blamed on pruning trees all day. Then came the nausea, the unexplained weight loss, the sudden exhaustion that turned my strong, unbreakable husband into a man who sat down halfway, through feeding the chickens because his hands shook too badly to scatter grain. The diagnosis came in late January. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The silent executioner. The doctor explained that it was aggressive fast, but just slow enough to give us time to put our affairs in order. Just slow enough for us to wake up every day and watch a little more of him slip away. Nicholas never cried when we heard the news. He sat in that sterile examination room with his big farmer hands folded in his lap and nodded as though the doctor was giving him planting instructions for the spring. On the drive home, he didn't speak. Neither did I. The snow fell in heavy silent sheets around us, muffling the world, cocooning us in grief, so thick I could hardly breathe. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, he whispered, "Don't tell them yet. Brandon and Melissa. Let them live without this shadow a little longer." I wanted to argue, to scream that they deserved to know, that he deserved their comfort. But I looked at him, the deep lines, etched by decades of sun and wind, the eyes dulled with pain and resignation, and I nodded. Because I loved him. Because in 40 years of marriage I had learned when to fight and when to surrender. We kept it secret for 3 months. Every morning he forced himself out of bed, pulled on his work boots, and walked the orchard rows as though sheer willpower could keep his body alive. Sometimes he made it all the way to the fence line. Other days he only reached the front porch before sinking into his rocking chair, chest heaving, sweat beading on his temples. Despite the winter chill, our days shrank into hospital visits and whispered midnight conversations. I learned to read his pain before he spoke, the way his jaw clenched, how his fingertips drummed against the bed sheets when the morphine started to wear off. He still tried to make me laugh. He called the IV pole his dance partner. He joked about wanting a Viking funeral in the orchard pond. But every laugh felt like glass splintering in my chest. When we finally told the children, it was already too late for them to pretend they cared. Brandon called from Boston, voice-clipped and efficient, asking about treatment options, financial planning, hospice arrangements. Melissa sent a text message with crying emojis, and promises to visit when she could get away from her wellness business obligations. Neither asked what their father needed. Neither asked how he felt. In his final weeks, Nicholas shrank into himself. He stopped getting out of bed. The man who had once carried 50-pound feed sacks on each shoulder now struggled to lift a coffee cup. His skin turned the pale yellow of bruised apples. His eyes no longer focused on me but drifted to corners of the room where no one stood. The hospice nurse told me it would be soon. She said it gently, her hand warm on my arm, but the words fell like stones in my gut. I sat beside his bed that night, holding his trembling hand in mine, listening to the rasp of his breath. He woke once in the darkest hour before dawn and whispered, "Promise me you'll keep the orchard. Promise me you won't let them take it. I promise," I said, pressing my forehead to his. I felt his breath hitch the last ragged edge of life clinging to him. His lips curved in the ghost of a smile. "Good girl," he murmured, and then he was gone. He died as the morning sun broke over the orchard, casting gold across the frost-tipped branches. I sat there for a long time, feeling the warmth spread across his still body, thinking about the promise I had made, thinking about the children we had raised and the legacy he left behind, thinking about how love in the end is not a thing you say, but a thing you prove. We buried him 3 days later on the hillside overlooking the orchard. Spring buds had begun to bloom delicate white and pink against stark branches. The pastor spoke about peace and heaven and the promise of eternal life, but I didn't hear him. All I heard was Nicholas's voice in my memory. "Don't let them take it." As the earth fell onto his coffin, I looked at Brandon's stiff posture and Melissa's trembling shoulders and wondered if they even understood what they had just lost. I promised him I would keep the orchard. I didn't yet know how much keeping that promise would cost me, or what it would awaken inside me. They came home after the funeral, but they did not come home to grieve. Brandon arrived first, stepping out of his sleek black rental car, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire pantry full of preserves. He hugged me stiffly, his cologne sharp and foreign against my cheek. His eyes swept over the farmhouse with thinly veiled impatience, as if returning here was an inconvenience in an already overbooked calendar. "Mom," he said in that tone he had perfected sometime after his first 6-figure bonus, calm managerial patronizing. "I'm just trying to be practical." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his spelling homework, while I prepared dinner. Nicholas was still upstairs in his bed, the sheets still carrying his scent when Brandon first brought up the business. "The medical bills must be piling up," he said, tapping his pen against a legal pad. "Have you considered downsizing? The orchard isn't easy to manage alone. Selling the land would give you security, peace of mind. Security, peace of mind. Pretty phrases that sounded like kindness, but felt like theft. He spoke of the orchard as if it were an outdated investment portfolio, instead of the soil that had carried 3 generations of life. He didn't see the sunburned fences Nicholas had repaired with his own hands, the trees he had grafted and nurtured through blight and frost. He saw only asset value per acre and potential developer bids. Brandon had left Millfield at 18, calling it suffocating. He never returned except for mandatory holidays, always staying at the inn in town because the country air aggravates my sinuses, Mom. But now, in the final weeks of his father's life, he'd suddenly developed a profound interest in Canton family orchards, the same place that once embarrassed him in front of his prep school friends. Melissa arrived 3 days later in an Uber from the airport, 6 designer suitcases rolling behind her like obedient pets. She swept into the kitchen with tearful hugs and the expensive scent of something floral layered over stale failure. 5 failed wellness ventures in 8 years, each one launched with her father's money. each one abandoned when it demanded more work than branding slogans and social media posts. But she cried real tears when she saw Nicholas, her shoulders shaking, as she clung to his frail hand. That night she slept on the floor beside his bed, curled into a blanket like a child, who feared monsters in the dark. For a fleeting moment I believed that, under all her vanity and restless ambition, there was still my daughter. That hope evaporated the morning after his funeral. We'd buried Nicholas beneath the rainier trees, the ones that blossomed earliest each spring, their petals drifting like snow onto the grass. The funeral was small. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices about his kindness, his integrity, how he'd helped save Peterson's dairy farm during the recession, or hired the Wilson boys for summer work so they could buy school clothes. No one mentioned his children. That evening, as I cleared cold casserole dishes left by mourners, I told them softly I thought, tomorrow we could go through your father's things together. Brandon set down his whiskey glass with a precision that reminded me painfully of Nicholas. About that, Mom. Melissa and I have been talking. We think it's best if we settle things quickly. We both need to get back to our lives. Settle things? I asked, my voice quiet. The estate Melissa chimed in without looking up from her phone. The house, the business. We need to figure out next steps. I expected grief. I expected a few bittersweet stories about their father, maybe a clumsy attempt at comfort. Instead, what I got felt like a boardroom meeting. Brandon opened his laptop right there on the table where we'd celebrated their birthdays and graduations. He pulled up projections, developer offers, potential timelines. Dad spoke to me about this last year, he said, eyes still on his screen. He was worried about you managing alone. The business needs modernization, investment. The house is too big for someone your age. Your age. As if I hadn't co-managed this orchard for 40 years, rising before dawn to prune trees and mend fences, running payroll and planting seedlings with my bare hands. As if arthritis in my knuckles meant my brain and soul had withered too. And you've done wonderfully, Mom Melissa added in her gentle, sugary voice, the same voice she used to sell overpriced detox powders to desperate women online. But it's time to think about your future. A retirement community would give you friends, activities. I stared at them, seeing not the children I had raised, but strangers draped in the skins of people I used to love. Strangers with eyes that saw nothing of the orchard's worth beyond its market value. Strangers who had come not to comfort, but to conquer. Brandon leaned forward, his cologne mingling with the smell of whiskey and souring grief. Dad left the business to Melissa and me in the will. He wanted us to take care of you, but he knew it needed younger management. I felt the world tilt under me, the words distant, as if shouted through water. In that moment, a single searing truth burned through my shock. They had not come home to bury their father. They had come home to bury me. Brandon slid a document across the kitchen table toward me. It wasn't on our family lawyer's letterhead, just printed paper clipped neatly, as if it were an HR form or a business proposal. Here's Dad's will, he said. He wanted everything to transfer seamlessly. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Nicholas's signature stared back at me. Too perfect, too steady for a man whose hands had been trembling so violently in his final weeks that he couldn't button his flannel shirts without help. You had him sign this while he was on morphine. My voice sounded hollow in my chest, echoing off the walls of the kitchen where I had baked them birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs and fairies, where I had taught them to shell peas and slice apples without cutting their fingers. Brandon's expression hardened. He was lucid. Melissa reached across the table, her diamond bracelets chiming softly. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. There's a developer interested. $7 million. It's a fresh start for all of us. Fresh start. As if the life Nicholas and I built was moldy bread to be discarded. As if the decades spent tending these trees, the organic certifications we fought for the harvest donations to local food banks, the orchard tours for elementary school kids, as if it were all worthless in the face of cashing out for cookie cutter, vacation homes for Philadelphia's wealthy. Your father would never sell this land for development, I said, my voice trembling but cold. This orchard was his life's work. Brandon sighed, exasperated. The business is outdated, Mom. The market's shifting. Dad was too stubborn to change. He left it all to us. Melissa added, scrolling through her phone as if browsing yoga retreat packages. But don't worry, we'll take care of you. Sunny Pines has an open suite, heated indoor pool, flower arranging classes. I sat there in my kitchen staring at the children I had raised to be strong, smart, ambitious children who were now wolves in designer wool coats, circling an old ewe too slow to flee. My heart pounded with grief so sharp, I thought it might split me open. I swallowed. I need time to process this. Of course, Brandon said smoothly, glancing at his Rolex. Melissa helped Mom pack a small bag. We'll take her to Sunny Pines for a tour. Melissa brightened, relief evident in her voice. You'll love it, Mom. It's time you let us take care of you for once. As she led me upstairs, I felt my knees trembling, not with fear, but with rage coiling slow and molten in my belly. I moved through my bedroom, touching the quilt my grandmother had made. Nicholas's flannel shirt still smelling faintly of cedar in him. I retrieved my medications, then reached into the hidden compartment behind the bathroom mirror, the one Nicholas had built when we first worried about burglaries in the late 80s. I slipped my passport and birth certificate into my purse. Then behind Nicholas's shirts, I retrieved the small fireproof box containing the original deed, 20 acres of orchard land, purchased in my maiden name before our marriage. Land they didn't know about. Land with the water rights any developer would need. As we walked back downstairs, my purse felt heavier, but my heart felt lighter, with a cold, precise clarity. They thought they were taking everything from me. They thought I was old, broken, helpless. They had no idea who I really was, or what I was about to become. They didn't drive me to Sunny Pines. The morning was bright, the kind of spring morning that promised renewal, the orchard alive with bees and drifting petals. But inside Brandon's sleek black SUV, everything felt cold. Melissa sat beside me, her phone glowing in her lap, as her thumbs flicked nervously across the screen. Brandon gripped the steering wheel with both hands, jaw working side to side, as if chewing on words he couldn't swallow. I sat silently behind them, clutching my purse against my chest. My heart pounded so hard, I could feel it echoing in my arthritic fingers. Through the window, I watched my life disappear. The apple trees Nicholas and I had planted, as saplings now stood mature, and proud branches heavy with blossoms that promised a rich harvest come autumn. The white farmhouse shrank behind me until it was just a memory against the rolling Pennsylvania hills. Neither of them looked back. They talked to each other in clipped, efficient phrases. We'll need to finalize with the developer by end of week, Brandon said, eyes fixed on the road. If escrow drags, it could affect the closing bonuses. I still need my advance released, Melissa whispered, not looking up. Chase called about my overdue credit cards. If they see my account balance drop. Don't worry about it. Dad's life insurance clears by Tuesday. It'll cover the shortfall. Dad's life insurance. They spoke of it like dividends, not like the final wages of a man who had spent his entire life breaking his body to nurture theirs. I closed my eyes, feeling grief and anger war within me, each carving out its territory in the hollow that used to hold hope. After about 30 minutes, Brandon turned off the highway onto County Road 27, a narrow gravel route flanked by skeletal fence posts and greening fields still wet from spring rains. I frowned, recognizing the road. It didn't lead to Sunny Pines. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice raw from disuse. Neither answered. 10 minutes later, Brandon pulled onto the gravel shoulder and put the car in park. The engine idled, a low mechanical hum filling the silence. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said, his voice disturbingly calm. For a long moment, I didn't understand. I blinked at him, at the dust swirling beyond the windshield, at the empty field stretching endlessly in every direction. Melissa's head snapped up, her eyes darting between Brandon and me. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice high and brittle. "We're supposed to take her to the tour." "What we discussed," Brandon snapped. "Mom's not going to make this easy. She'll contest the will, cause delays with escrow, embarrass us with the developer. This is cleaner." He turned in his seat to look at me, then his face blank of anything resembling remorse or love. Just efficiency. Cold, practical efficiency. The kind that probably earned him bonuses and promotions in glass-walled offices, far from the orchard that raised him. He reached across me, pressed the door release. The lock clicked open, with a finality that sounded louder than a gunshot. "You have your medication, some clothes. There's a gas station 5 miles up the road. You can call one of your quilting friends." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this man with the boy who once followed Nicholas into the orchard at dawn, barefoot, in his pajamas, peppering his father with questions about pollination and pruning. Trying to find in his eyes the child I'd held against my chest after nightmares rocking him back to sleep, with quiet lullabies about apple blossoms and morning sun. There was nothing there. I turned to Melissa. Tears welled in her wide brown eyes, brimming but unshed. Her lips trembled as she reached for my hand, her diamond bracelets jangling like bells. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's just, we need this money. I have debts." Brandon promised he'd help me start over. For a brief, heartbreaking moment, I saw the little girl who used to twirl in my kitchen, wearing a pink tutu, and fairy wings, her hair trailing ribbons I'd braided into her curls. I almost reached for her then. Almost, but that little girl was gone, and the woman sitting before me was not weeping for what they were about to do to me. She was weeping for herself. I nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. My knees shook as I gathered the small suitcase they'd packed for me. Orthopedic shoes, beige cardigans, elastic waistpants, the uniform of a woman they'd already buried in their minds. I stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The door slammed shut behind me with a hollow finality. Melissa covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. Brandon didn't look at me again. He shifted the SUV into drive and pulled away, gravel crunching beneath the tires. I watched their car grow smaller, Melissa's tear-streaked face visible through the rear windows, until they crested the rise and disappeared from sight. For a long time, I stood there in the morning sun. The wind whipped my hair across my face. The sky was a flawless, pale blue. The field smelled of wet earth and new grass. The suitcase felt heavy in my hand. My purse strap bit into my shoulder. In that silence, betrayal echoed louder than any sound I had ever heard. No phone, no money, or so they thought. But in my purse lay my passport, my birth certificate, and the original deed to 20 acres of orchard land purchased before I married Nicholas, the most profitable acreage with water rights no developer could proceed without. Land they didn't know existed. Land in my maiden name. My secret. My salvation. They thought they had stripped me of everything. But as I stood there on County Road 27, my children driving away with the certainty of victory, a feeling bloomed deep within my chest. It started as a quiet thrum like the first shiver of wind before a summer storm, then spread until it filled every hollow place inside me. Not fear, not grief, power. For the first time in 68 years, I felt truly free. Free from the burden of loving those who saw me only as an obstacle. Free from pretending kindness was weakness. Free from the roles they forced upon me. Mother, caretaker, peacemaker, silent pillar of sacrifice. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I stood on that gravel shoulder for a long time, feeling the weight of 68 years settle into my bones. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the top of my head, while the spring breeze chilled my ankles. Birds flitted between fence posts, oblivious to the old woman abandoned at the edge of an empty field. But I wasn't empty. No. As I watched the dust settle where Brandon's car had disappeared, something inside me solidified. A steel core I'd forgotten I possessed. I shifted the strap of my purse higher on my shoulder and began walking. The gravel crunched beneath my sensible funeral flats, with every step the rhythmic scrape grounding me in reality. Pain bloomed in my hips and knees within the first mile, but I welcomed it. Pain meant I was still alive. Pain meant I was moving. I walked past fields greening with early wheat, past decaying barns sinking into their foundations, past stands of wild apple saplings blooming in tangled clusters. Each step stripped away the remnants of shock and grief, leaving only cold, deliberate purpose. They thought they'd won, that they'd left me helpless, broken, lost. They didn't know about the hidden compartment Nicholas built behind the bathroom mirror in 1987, after a string of farmhouse burglaries left the county rattled. They didn't know about the fireproof box I kept there containing my passport birth certificate, and the original deed to 20 acres of orchard land I bought before we married the land with the well and water rights that supplied the entire farm. I walked for nearly 2 hours before Miller's Gas and Grocery rose ahead, shimmering in the warming air. My legs burned with exhaustion. My feet throbbed with blisters. My mouth tasted of dust and old grief. But my mind was sharper than it had felt in years. I stepped into the dim cool of the convenience store, the scent of burnt coffee and motor oil greeting me like an old friend. Ray Miller stood behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Naomi," he said, eyes widening in surprise. "You all right? You look a bit peaked." "Just walked farther than I meant to," I replied, steadying myself against the counter. "Ray, can I use your phone? I left mine at home." "Of course." He gestured me behind the counter to the old rotary wall phone that had served Millfield customers since the 70s. "Take your time." I dialed the number by heart. The man who answered had a voice like gravel over whiskey. "Vincent Hargrove's office." "Vincent, it's Naomi Canton." A pause. "Naomi," he said slowly, concern tightening his words. "I've been trying to reach you. Your son presented a document at the reading, but I had concerns. I know I interrupted." My voice was calm, measured stronger than it had been in weeks. "Vincent, I need your help. And I need discretion. You have both. My office. 1 hour. I'll be there." I hung up, thanked Ray, and bought a bottle of water and a pre-packaged sandwich I had no intention of eating. As I left, he placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Anything you need, Naomi, you let me know." Walking out into the sun, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't felt since before Nicholas fell sick resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I would not be erased by the children I birthed. I would not let them salt the earth Nicholas and I spent 40 years coaxing to bloom. They believed kindness was weakness, that love was blindness, that sacrifice was surrender. They were wrong. As I walked down Main Street toward Vincent's office, cars honked in greeting neighbors, waved from sidewalks, and the scent of lilacs drifted from the bushes lining the Methodist church. This was my town, my land, my life. And I was about to remind them and my children exactly who Naomi Marie Blackwood Canton really was. Vincent's office sat on the second floor of an old Victorian on Main Street, its peeling white trim and wraparound porch as familiar to me as my own kitchen. I climbed the creaking wooden stairs slowly each step, shooting pain through my knees. But I welcomed it. Pain meant I was still moving. Pain meant I wasn't finished. Helen, his secretary, looked up from her desk, startled. "Mrs. Canton," she said, rising quickly. "Mr. Hargrove is expecting you. Can I get you anything?" "Water, coffee, I'm fine, Helen," I said, though. My throat burned with thirst and grief. "Thank you." Vincent met me at his door. His tall frame stooped with age, but his eyes sharp as ever behind steel-rimmed glasses. He guided me into his office and closed the door softly behind me. "Tell me everything," he said, sitting not behind his desk, but beside me, in a leather chair. So I did. I told him about Brandon's document with Nicholas's forged signature, about the proposed sale to Platinum Acres developers, about Melissa's tears that tasted only of self-pity, and about the roadside where they left me to disappear like an unwanted stray. As I spoke, Vincent's jaw tightened. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment, tapping one finger against his knee. "The will they showed you," he said finally, "was not the one Nicholas and I prepared. Their document is a forgery." I suspected as much, I replied, reaching into my purse. From it, I withdrew the fireproof box I'd carried out of my home that morning. I placed it on the small mahogany table between us and flipped open the latch with steady hands. Inside lay the original deed to the 20 acres Nicholas and I purchased, before our marriage, the most profitable land in the orchard, with the primary well and irrigation rights. Land in my maiden name. Land my children didn't know existed. Vincent's eyes widened. He whistled softly. "Ah, smart," he murmured. "Very smart. Nicholas always was one for contingency planning." "Insurance," I said, repeating the word Nicholas used decades ago, in case the orchard ever failed. But today it's insurance of another kind. He lifted the deed, reverently scanning its details. "What do you want to do, Naomi?" I met his gaze, letting him see the cold steel behind my grief. "I want my home back. I want the business my husband built. And I want my children to understand exactly what they've done." Vincent nodded once. "We'll start by freezing all business accounts and filing an emergency injunction on any sale of the property based on the fraudulent will." "No," I said sharply. "That's not enough. Courts are for people with time. I need to move faster." Understanding flickered across his face, followed by a small approving smile. "What do you have in mind?" I reached into my purse again and withdrew a lined yellow legal pad filled with notes scribbled in tight, precise handwriting. Names, numbers, deadlines, weak points. "I need you to contact Harold Winters at Pennsylvania Trust Bank. Freeze all orchard business accounts. Then call Martin Adams. At the Agricultural Extension Office, he needs to file an immediate environmental review of the proposed development site." Vincent scanned the list, his smile widening with each line. "You've been busy." "I've been thinking," I corrected softly. "Now it's time to act." That night I sat in the floral papered comfort of Rose Hill bed and breakfast, the only guest in a place that smelled of lavender sachets and old pine floors. The room was silent except for the ticking of a brass alarm clock on the dresser. I made my calls under the dim light of a ceramic lamp. My first was to Harold Winters. "Harold, it's Naomi Canton. I need your help to protect what's left of our business," quietly. My second was to Martin Adams. "Martin, Nicholas always spoke highly of you. I need information about any protected wetlands within Canton property lines, especially ones included in the proposed development. My third was to Sophia Delaney, editor of the Millfield Gazette, and Nicholas's second cousin, Sophia. I think there's a story you might want fraudulent wills developers, violating agricultural protection acts, and a widow fighting for her land. By midnight, I had made 7 calls. Each one spun a new strand in the web I was weaving. Outside my window, Millfield slept peacefully under a waxing moon, unaware that Naomi Canton, once just the quiet orchard wife, was planning war. I stared at my reflection in the antique dresser mirror. Wrinkled skin, thinning hair twisted into a bun, eyes rimmed red from tears not yet shed. I looked every inch the old woman my children saw me as. But inside, behind the crow's feet, and arthritic knuckles burned the quiet, enduring fury of a woman betrayed by her own blood. They thought they could take everything and leave me with nothing. They would soon learn the cost of underestimating the quietest woman in the room. Morning came cold and bright, slicing through the lace curtains of my room at Rose Hill B&B. I dressed slowly, every joint stiff with age and the ache of betrayal, but my mind was clear, sharp as a pruning knife. I twisted my hair into a bun, pinned it tightly, and looked at my reflection. Today was not for mourning. Today was for war. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I walked into Vincent's office. Helen greeted me with a tight, worried smile. She saw something different in my eyes. That morning gone was the grief-stricken widow. In her place stood a woman with nothing left to lose. Vincent was already waiting, reading over the environmental reports Martin Adams had emailed at dawn. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. There's a protected wetland running through the southern edge of the property, he said. Any developer would need an extensive environmental impact study which could delay them for years. Martin says the area also contains rare pollinator species. That's leverage. Good, I replied, settling into the chair across from him. Freeze the orchard's accounts. File the emergency injunction to block any sale or transfer of assets based on the forged will. Vincent's eyebrows rose. You understand, Naomi. This will trigger immediate retaliation. Your children won't take this quietly. I'm counting on it, I said, calmly folding my hands atop my purse. The more noise they make, the faster they reveal their weaknesses. By noon, the paperwork was filed. Harold at Pennsylvania Trust Bank confirmed the orchard's business accounts were frozen pending investigation. Martin contacted the State Environmental Board to initiate a review that would effectively lock the developers out. Sophia at the Gazette texted me, "Story running front page tomorrow." You're braver than any of us, Naomi. At 12:47 p.m., my prepaid phone rang. I let it buzz 4 times before answering, keeping my voice level and cold. This is Naomi. Mom. Brandon's voice crackled with barely contained fury. What have you done? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I've only just begun. Be reasonable, he snapped. I could hear Melissa's shrill voice in the background, demanding he put me on speaker. You can't just freeze accounts and file injunctions. Do you have any idea what this does to our deal? Your deal, I corrected softly. Not mine, not your father's. Where are you? Melissa's voice broke in high and desperate. We've been worried sick. The lie slid between us like a poisoned blade. They hadn't called the police. They hadn't contacted neighbors. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their plan. Worried I survived. I asked, my tone calm and almost gentle. Worried I didn't conveniently disappear. That's not fair, Melissa wailed. Brandon made a mistake. Shut up, Melissa, Brandon snapped. I let the silence stretch until it burned. Listen carefully, I said, finally my voice dropping into a register I hadn't used since scolding them as children. I'm giving you one chance, Withdraw your fraudulent will. Sign the business and house back to me. In return, I'll give you each a one-time payment of $50,000. After that, we're done." Brandon laughed sharp and ugly. "You're delusional. You have nothing. The will is legal." "The will is a forgery," Vincent interjected smoothly, leaning toward the speakerphone. "As the lawyer who drafted Nicholas Canton's actual will, I can testify to that." The silence on the line now was different, heavy, tainted with fear. "You have 24 hours, I said. After that, the offer expires, and I proceed with criminal charges." I hung up before they could answer. Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying me. "They'll fight this." I nodded once, eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. Outside, the orchard glowed with new spring green. Nicholas's orchard. My orchard. "I know," I whispered. "And I'm ready." For the first time since Nicholas died, I felt something bloom in my chest. Not grief, not despair, purpose. Let them come. I had built my life, tending fragile saplings into strong trees, weathering droughts and storms and blights. I knew how to nurture. I knew how to protect. And now my children were about to learn. I also knew how to destroy. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the small window of my room at Rose Hill, watching moonlight spill across Millfield's silent streets. In my lap lay my notebook pages filled with dates, names, and vulnerabilities my children never imagined I knew. By dawn, I had a plan. At 7:00 a.m., I called Robert Wilson, Nicholas's oldest friend and college roommate, now managing partner of one of Pennsylvania's largest real estate law firms. 30 years ago, Nicholas had loaned Robert money to rebuild his practice after it nearly collapsed in the recession. When he answered, his gravelly voice was tinged with warmth and grief, as he told me he'd been meaning to call that he was so sorry about Nicholas. I thanked him, my voice steady, and told him I was calling about something urgent. I needed his help. I laid out everything, the forged will, the betrayal the developer poised to gut our orchard. When I finished, silence hummed across the line until Robert finally spoke, his voice tight, naming platinum acres and their predatory development tactics, elder coercion environmental violations. They'd been looking for a way to stop them. Now I told him he had one. He promised he'd be in Millfield tomorrow morning, telling me not to sign anything before he arrived. I assured him that time was long past. After hanging up, I called Thomas Winters Harold's son and assistant district attorney for the county. He paused when I told him I wanted to discuss pressing criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. "Against your own children?" he asked. "Yes," I replied with no hesitation. By noon, Robert Wilson arrived in Millfield with 2 associates, trailing him like shadows. He strode into Vincent's office, silver-haired, steel-eyed, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than the last harvest's net profit. Taking my hands in his, he told me we were going to handle this, that they had picked the wrong widow to bully. For the next 2 hours, I watched Robert dismantle Brandon and Melissa's carefully constructed plan. He drafted cease and desist letters to Platinum Acres, threatened injunctions on environmental grounds, and prepared civil suits that would tie up any sale for years. At precisely 2:14 p.m., my prepaid phone rang again. Brandon's number flashed on the screen. I answered on the 4th ring, my voice calm. Brandon sounded tight with rage, barely held in check as he said they would sign the papers, but wanted something in writing, guaranteeing I wouldn't pursue charges. I let the silence stretch, savoring the reversal of power, before telling him I had offered that yesterday, but the terms had changed. When he asked what I wanted, the bravado stripped from his voice. I told him to be at Vincent's office at 4 o'clock, and to bring Melissa. I would lay out my terms then. When they arrived, they looked like fallen royalty. Brandon's tailored shirt was rumpled, his tie loose around his neck. Melissa's mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. Neither met my eyes as they sat across from me, Vincent and Robert. I told them it wouldn't take long. Robert slid the documents across the polished oak table. They renounced all claims to Canton Family Orchards, the farmhouse, and all associated assets. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Brandon skimmed the document, his face paling as he realized they were forfeiting their inheritance entirely. Melissa's voice cracked when she reminded me they were my children. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the little girl in pink tutus, but the woman who had left her mother on a gravel roadside to die of grief and humiliation. Exactly what you tried to do to me, I told her coldly. The difference was I was offering them a legal way out, not abandonment on the side of County Road 27. Brandon swallowed hard before slowly picking up the pen and signing. Melissa's tears fell onto the page as she scribbled her name. When it was done, I gathered the documents and stood telling them they would leave Millfield today, and if I saw either of them here again, I would press charges regardless of what they'd signed. Melissa let out a sob, but I felt nothing. Brandon didn't look at me as they left, their shoulders hunched in defeat, their expensive shoes silent against the thick carpet. I watched them through Vincent's window as they walked separately to their cars. Brandon to his sleek rental, Melissa to her flashy red convertible that Nicholas had helped her buy last year. Neither looked back at the office. Neither looked at each other. Vincent said quietly that it was done. But it wasn't done. Not yet. Because the legal battle was won. But my war, the war for Nicholas's legacy, for my dignity, for the orchard's future, still had one final act. I turned to Robert, my gaze clear, unwavering, and told him I needed a ride. When he asked where to, I answered simply home, because the time had come to reclaim the house they tried to steal, to sit in Nicholas's rocking chair again, to watch the orchard bloom, and to remind them and the world that kindness is not weakness, it is power waiting for purpose. The Canton farmhouse looked exactly as I had left it 4 days earlier. White clapboard siding glowing in the late afternoon sun, the wide front porch sagging slightly in the middle, where Nicholas always promised to replace the joist next summer. His rocking chair sat empty facing the orchard now, awash in gold light blossoms, glowing like lanterns against the darkening rows. Only Brandon's rental car in the driveway marked any change. Robert pulled up behind it and cut the engine. "Want me to come in with you?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, gripping my purse. "This part I do alone." Inside the house smelled of stale coffee and expensive aftershave. I moved through the downstairs rooms, noting the small violations of his presence. Muddy shoes. By the door he would never have left there as a boy. A half-empty whiskey glass on the dining table, where we had once celebrated his birthdays with apple cake and paper crowns. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak familiar under my feet. At the top, our bedroom door stood ajar, light spilling into the dim hallway. I pushed it open. Brandon stood by the window staring out at the orchard. The room was ransacked dresser. Drawers yanked open, closet doors ajar, Nicholas's flannel shirts scattered across the bed. Brandon's broad shoulders hunched forward, his silhouette lined with the last rays of sun. Looking for something, I asked, my voice cold and sharp. He didn't startle, didn't turn. "I know there has to be more," he said. "Dad wouldn't leave everything to you." "Your father trusted me," I replied simply. "Something you clearly never learned to do." Now he turned and his face was a ruin of rage, grief, and something more desperate. "You've destroyed everything," he spat. "The deal is gone." Melissa's creditors are calling. My firm is investigating why I took so much time off without explanation. Actions have consequences, I said softly. His laugh was bitter and hollow. Is that what this is? A lesson? Always the teacher even now. Not a lesson, I corrected, stepping to the bookshelf. I pulled down Nicholas's old leather-bound copy of the Rose Walden and slipped a sealed envelope from between its pages. Justice. I held the envelope out to him. He snatched it from my hand, ripping it open with shaking fingers. As he read, tears welled in his eyes, but they did not fall. When he finally looked up, his gaze was empty. He wrote this for you, I said, the week before he died. I was going to give it to you after the funeral, before I understood what you really were. He crumpled the letter in his fist. You think you've won? He whispered. No, I said. I think I've survived. I moved to the closet, gathering Nicholas's shirts from the floor and folding them carefully, one by one, placing them back on their hangers. Brandon stood frozen shoulders, trembling with the effort of holding himself together. Take what you need from here, I said without looking at him. Then leave. You are no longer welcome in this house. He didn't argue, didn't curse or beg or apologize. He simply walked out, the floorboards creaking under his heavy steps. I heard the front door open, the screen door slap shut behind him, and the engine of his rental car roar to life. I watched from the window as he drove away without looking back. When the dust finally settled on the gravel driveway, silence descended upon the house like a benediction. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 40 years, surrounded by the wreckage Brandon left behind, and felt nothing but a quiet, hollow ache. Not grief, not triumph, just emptiness. But emptiness is a space waiting to be filled, and I would fill it with plans, with purpose, with the life Nicholas and I had dreamed of before his death, a life they had tried to steal, a life I had just taken back. As darkness fell, I brewed a cup of tea and carried it out to the porch. I settled into Nicholas's rocking chair, facing the orchard, glowing under the rising moon. The blossoms stirred in the breeze, each tree standing silent and strong. Tomorrow I would begin rebuilding what they tried to destroy. Tonight I simply rocked back and forth, listening to the quiet night sounds of home, letting their betrayal fade into memory, and feeling for the first time since Nicholas died truly at peace. Morning came, pale and cold mist curling low across the orchard rows, like ghostly fingers reaching for the awakening trees. I woke in Nicholas's bed alone, the indentation of his body still faintly etched into the mattress beside me, though his warmth had long since faded. I lay there for a moment, staring at the hairline cracks in the ceiling plaster, feeling the quiet of the house settle into my bones. Then I rose. There was too much to do for grief to claim me again. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of stale coffee and dust. Brandon's whiskey glass still sat on the table beside his open laptop, its glowing screen casting silent judgment on the abandoned plans within. I closed it gently and carried the glass to the sink, rinsing it out with water that ran cold over my arthritic fingers. Each movement felt ritualistic, a cleansing of the residue of their betrayal. At 9:00 a.m., sharp Robert Wilson arrived with two of his associates. Their dark suits looked out of place in my farmhouse kitchen, where the linoleum floor was worn soft by decades of my bare feet, and the wallpaper curled at the edges from humidity and time. Morning Naomi Robert said, his voice warm but brisk with purpose. "Ready?" I nodded once. "Let's finish this." We drove into town together. Vincent met us at his office with a thick folder of documents that smelled of ink and finality. "Platinum Acres has been notified the sale is void," Vincent said, sliding the papers across his polished oak desk. "They're reeling. Robert's team uncovered enough environmental violations in their other projects. to keep them tangled in litigation for years. Robert's lips twitched in a thin, satisfied smile. They underestimated you, Naomi. Everyone underestimates old women. I replied, my voice calm. That's why we're dangerous. By noon, the Canton family orchards accounts were unfrozen and fully under my name. The deed to the 20 acres purchased in my maiden name had been formally recorded, giving me not just control of the orchard's water rights, but also an unbreakable claim to its core operations. Without those wells, no developer could ever touch this land. Melissa called 3 times that afternoon. I let each call go to voicemail, her voice growing more frantic with every message. Mom, please just call me back. I don't know where to go. Brandon won't answer. I'm scared. I made mistakes, I know, but I'm your daughter. Daughter. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. Brandon didn't call at all. Vincent told me he'd left town early that morning, his firm forcing a resignation after news of the fraud investigation broke. Melissa, too, would soon be stripped of her remaining assets, as creditors closed in the final consequence of a life lived on illusions and borrowed time. That evening, I walked the orchard rows alone. The air smelled of damp earth and awakening blossoms. The ground was still soft beneath my feet, the way it always felt in early spring before the sun baked it hard. I ran my hand along the gnarled branch of a Honeycrisp tree. Nicholas planted the year Melissa was born, its trunk now thick with age and strength. This is yours again, Nicholas. I whispered to the silent rose. I kept my promise. Under the softening twilight, I could almost hear him breathe a sigh of relief through the rustling leaves. When I returned to the house, the answering machine. Light blinked red in the dark kitchen. I pressed play. Mom, please. I'm sorry. I didn't know what Brandon was planning. I didn't know what else to do. Please. I have nowhere left to go. Her voice cracked on that last sentence, but I felt no pain in hearing it. Only a tired sadness for the child she once was and the woman she had chosen to become. I erased the message. The next morning, I drove into Millfield to meet with Martin Adams and his daughter Lisa, who I'd hired to manage the orchard operations. She was young, smart, and unafraid to get dirt under her nails. As we walked the rows together, she spoke animatedly about introducing agroforestry cover crops and expanding the orchard's direct-to-consumer sales with a farm store and weekend tours. Your husband would have loved these ideas, she said softly. Yes, I replied, feeling the ache of his absence bloom fresh and tender in my chest. He would have. In the afternoon, I sat with Sophia Delaney at the Gazette office, approving the final copy of her exposé. The headline read, Orchard Matriarch Reclaims Legacy from Developer Fraud and Family Betrayal. Underneath the subheading quoted me directly, Kindness is not weakness. Love is not blindness. Betrayal taught me that. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. That night I sat on the front porch, rocking slowly in Nicholas's chair, as the spring breeze stirred the apple blossoms into drifting clouds of pale pink and white. Stars winked into existence overhead, silent witnesses to the battle just won. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucille. Front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer tomorrow. Platinum Acres indicted for elder exploitation. Your fight sparked an investigation across 3 states. I set the phone down in my lap and closed my eyes. Justice, not revenge. Though perhaps in the end they were the same thing. In the morning I would begin filing paperwork for the Nicholas Canton Agricultural Scholarship, a fund for local students pursuing sustainable farming. Its seed money would come from the profits my children tried to steal. Next week, I would host the first community harvest dinner, inviting neighbors who had rallied to my side when I needed them, most feeding them under lanterns strung between orchard rows, heavy with promise. But tonight, In the quiet dark, I rocked back and forth, feeling the creak of old boards beneath me, the cool breeze lifting wisps of hair from my neck, and the orchard scent rising around me like a benediction. I had lost Nicholas. I had lost my children, but I had reclaimed my life. And in the stillness of that spring night, I finally understood I was not alone. I was free. 3 months later, summer settled over Millfield in waves of golden heat, ripening the orchard into a symphony of reds, greens, and yellows. The trees bent under the weight of their fruit, heavy with promise. Bees hummed lazily between blossoms gone to seed, and the scent of sun-warmed apples drifted through the open farmhouse windows like a blessing. I sat on the porch in Nicholas's rocking chair, watching dusk gather in purple shadows across the orchard rows. The old boards creaked under me a familiar music that soothed the quiet ache in my chest. In my lap lay a leather-bound notebook, where I had been sketching plans for the farm's future. A farm-to-table restaurant in the old barn educational orchard tours for local schools. A canning workshop for women wanting to reclaim the lost arts of their grandmothers. Nicholas would have loved these dreams. We used to talk about them in bed on winter nights, his voice low and warm in the dark, weaving a future we never thought time would steal from us. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. A text from Lucille. Front page again today. Platinum Acres CEO sentenced to 8 years. Your fight gave the DA everything they needed. Proud of you, Naomi. I smiled faintly and set the phone down. Justice, not revenge. Though maybe after everything they were one and the same. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. I read the preview anyway. Mom, please. It's been months. Can we talk, Em? I deleted it without replying, just as I had deleted the 12 before it. Melissa had begun reaching out after her creditors seized her car. Her condo. The remains of a life built on illusions. Brandon never contacted me at all. Vincent heard he'd moved to Chicago to work as a mid-level consultant after his forced resignation, his name stripped from every project he once boasted about. They were learning the hardest truth of all. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep to be sutured closed. The screen door creaked open behind me. Lisa stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans. "We're finishing up in the South Rows," she said, her young face flushed from the day's work. "Do you want to do a final walk through tomorrow before we start picking?" "Yes," I said, smiling up at her. "First light." She hesitated, then reached down and squeezed my shoulder. "You're amazing, Naomi. We couldn't do this without you." When she disappeared back inside, I looked out over the orchard again. Fireflies flickered among the tree trunks. An owl called softly from the cottonwoods at the fence line. The air smelled of earth cooling under stars. For the first time in months, I closed my eyes and let myself rest in the peace of it. I thought about Nicholas, about the children we raised, about the life we built together, from nothing but 20 acres of neglected apple trees and 2 sets of calloused hands. I thought about the battles I had fought and won in his name for his legacy. And I realized something I hadn't understood on County Road 27, standing alone with nothing but a small suitcase. And my rage. I was not alone. I had neighbors who brought casseroles in silent solidarity. I had Lucille who brewed strong tea and said hard truths with a baker's kindness. I had Vincent who fought beside me when my own blood betrayed me. I had Lisa and the orchard crew who called me Mrs. Canton with quiet respect and carried my dreams forward with their young hands. Most of all, I had myself. I was not the woman they abandoned on a roadside. I was the woman who rose from it, carrying the orchard on her back like roots carrying the promise of spring. I was not alone. I was free.